The planet was quiet, far from any known star lanes, a lonely world covered with jagged mountains and deep, misty valleys. Most travelers avoided it. Legends told of dragons, ancient creatures with wings wider than ships and scales harder than the strongest metals. Few dared to land and even fewer returned. On this day, a small ship drifted slowly toward the surface. Inside, a woman cradled a human baby. Her face was pale and tired, her hands shaking. "I have no choice," she whispered. "They will never forgive him. But he must live." With trembling fingers, she placed the child in a small, sturdy pod and set it down near a cave entrance. She kissed his forehead, tears falling onto his tiny cheeks, and activated the pod's life support. Then, without another word, she disappeared into the ship, leaving the pod to slide gently down the mountain slope and disappear into the mist. The baby's cries echoed softly through the valley, carried by the wind. For hours no one came. The baby was cold and hungry, alone in a strange and dangerous place. But something watched. High above the mountains, wings stretched wide against the sky. A dragon, older than any human could imagine, glided silently, its golden eyes focused on the tiny human. The elder dragon, known to others as Valeth, had seen many things in its long life. Wars, stars being born, civilizations rising and falling. Yet this tiny human was different. Valeth could sense the life force inside him, fragile but unusual. The dragon descended, wings folding as it landed near the pod. Its shadow covered the baby, but the child did not cry. Perhaps he felt the presence, or perhaps he already knew he was no longer alone. Valeth nudged the pod carefully with his massive snout. He smelled the child, his warmth, the faint heartbeat. The dragon's sharp instincts told him this little human was meant for something more. He growled softly, a low sound that echoed like distant thunder, and other dragons began to emerge from the caves. They circled, curious and cautious. "Why save him?" asked a smaller dragon, her scales silver like moonlight. "He is weak. He will not survive here." Valeth's eyes glowed softly. "Weak, yes, but not worthless. This one carries a spark. We do not know its meaning yet, but life like this must be protected." The dragons decided together. They would not harm him. They would shelter him, raise him, and keep him safe until the day he could stand on his own. Valeth carefully lifted the pod and carried it into a warm cavern, deep inside the mountains. Inside, fires burned without smoke, and pools of crystal-clear water reflected the flickering light. The baby was placed on soft moss, and for the first time he smiled. The dragons watched, fascinated by his small, fragile joy. Days turned into weeks. The baby grew quickly. He could crawl, then stand, then walk. The dragons were patient teachers. They did not speak in human language, but they taught with gestures, with stories told through action. The baby learned to watch the skies, to listen to the wind, to feel the rhythm of the mountains. He learned courage by seeing how the dragons faced storms and predators, even other dragons that were not friendly. The child, whom the dragons came to call Kale, was unlike any human the dragons had seen. He was curious and clever. He could climb rocks with small, nimble hands. He could hide in places where even young dragons could not reach. He listened more than he spoke. He watched more than he acted. And though he was small, he had a heart that never gave up. Valeth watched him closely. Sometimes when Kale slept, the elder dragon would whisper to the others, "This one, he will touch the stars." The younger dragons would snort or shake their heads. "He is only a child. How can he touch the stars?" Valeth only smiled. He had seen the impossible before. He knew the universe had a way of surprising those who waited patiently. Kale had no memory of his parents. The only life he knew was with the dragons. He learned to trust them, to follow them, to respect their wisdom. He learned to run through the valleys at dawn, feeling the wind against his face. He learned to swim in the icy rivers, always guided by dragon wings above him. And he learned something more important, that being small did not mean being powerless, and being human did not mean being weak. One evening, as the twin suns of the planet set behind the mountains, painting the sky in gold and purple, Kale sat on a high cliff with Valeth beside him. "One day I will go beyond these mountains," Kale said softly, though the dragons could not understand words completely. Valeth's eyes glowed. "And when you do, remember this," he rumbled. "You are not alone. You carry us with you even when the skies are empty." Kale looked at the horizon. He did not know what waited beyond the mountains, beyond the stars. But he felt ready. For the first time he felt the spark that Valeth had seen when he was only a baby. A spark that would grow into something greater than even the dragons could imagine. The abandoned human baby was no longer just a child. He was the beginning of a story that would one day reach across the galaxy. Kale grew quickly. The days and nights on the dragon planet were long and strange, but he learned to move with them. He ran over mountains, leapt across rivers and climbed cliffs that seemed impossible. The dragons watched him closely, guiding him with patience. They did not shout or force him. They showed him. They taught him with actions, with gestures, with example. Valeth, the elder dragon, was always near. He would spread his massive wings and soar into the skies, and Kale would watch, fascinated. Sometimes Valeth would land beside him and nudge him gently as if saying, "One day, you will fly in your own way." Kale did not yet know what that meant, but he felt the dragon's pride and encouragement. The smaller dragons were playful and curious. They teased Kale, racing him along ridges or splashing him in the rivers. At first, Kale fell many times. His human body was smaller and weaker than the dragon's, and he often tumbled over rocks or stumbled through the water. But he never gave up. Every fall taught him something new. Every mistake was a lesson. And slowly, Kale became strong in his own way. The dragons taught Kale about the world without using words. They showed him which plants could heal, which waters were safe, and how to sense danger in the mountains. Kale learned to listen to the wind, to feel the vibrations of the earth, and to notice the smallest changes in the sky. Even without fire or wings, he began to move with skill and intelligence that impressed the dragons. Valeth sometimes took Kale to hidden caves filled with ancient markings and glowing crystals. "These are the memories of the dragons," the elder dragon explained, not in words, but through gestures and images in Kale's mind. Kale watched the colors shift, telling stories of storms, great battles, and stars being born. He learned to think carefully, to understand the world around him, and to respect knowledge and history. Kale also learned about patience. Dragons were older than anyone Kale could imagine. They moved slowly, thinking carefully before every action. At first, Kale wanted to run faster, climb higher, and do more. But he began to see the wisdom in waiting, in observing, and in understanding before acting. One morning, Kale climbed to the top of a high peak. Below him, valleys stretched endlessly, rivers sparkled like silver, and the twin suns shone brightly. He realized that the world was bigger than he had ever imagined, and that there were things beyond the mountains he had never seen. He wanted to explore them, but he also felt fear. What if he could not survive? Valeth landed beside him, massive wings folding slowly. The elder dragon's golden eyes met Kale's. "You are ready," Valeth said softly in his own dragon way. Kale did not understand the words completely, but he felt their meaning. The dragons had prepared him, not for battle, but for life. He could face the unknown with courage. Kale was curious about the stars. Every night he would sit on a cliff and look up at the sky. He wondered about the planets and people far away. He imagined other humans, other creatures, and worlds filled with light and adventure. The dragons watched silently, understanding that his curiosity was a gift, a spark that could grow into something extraordinary. As Kale grew taller, his body became stronger, but it was his mind that impressed the dragons most. He noticed patterns, solved small problems, and even taught younger dragons tricks they did not know. The dragons began to call him the clever one. Valeth smiled at this. Cleverness, he knew, could sometimes achieve what strength alone could not. Kale learned kindness too. He saw dragons help each other, share food, and protect those weaker than themselves. He learned that real strength came not from hurting others but from helping them. Even in a world full of creatures stronger and larger than himself, Kale understood that care, courage, and thoughtfulness could make him powerful in ways no one expected. One evening, as the twin suns set behind jagged cliffs, Kale sat on a high ledge, watching the stars appear. Valeth landed beside him, wings folding with a soft thud. Kale looked up at the dragons, feeling their presence and wisdom. He did not know what the future held, but he felt ready. He was no longer just a human child abandoned in a dangerous world. He had learned the ways of dragons: strength, patience, wisdom, courage, and kindness. Valeth gazed at him with pride. "The world beyond the mountains will be different," the elder dragon seemed to say. "It will test you in ways we cannot, but you carry what is most important. You carry the spark of life, curiosity, and courage. You are ready." Kale smiled. He felt the warmth of the dragons around him, the fire of their hearts, and the safety of their presence. He had grown not just in size but in mind and spirit. And he knew that one day he would leave the mountains not as a helpless child, but as someone who could face the galaxy with hope and wisdom. The dragons watched silently as Kale looked to the horizon. They knew the spark inside him was growing, becoming something stronger than any fire or wing. Kale, the human child once abandoned, was ready to step into a larger world. a world waiting for a clever, brave and kind human to make a difference. The galaxy was vast and beautiful, full of stars, planets and life of every kind. But it was not safe. Far away from Kale's dragon planet, an empire of powerful machines and clever rulers had begun to take control of weaker worlds. They taxed planets, used their resources and made many beings live in fear. Even the strongest races were too divided to stop them. Kale had never seen the galaxy beyond his mountains. He only knew the skies above his dragon home and the valleys and rivers below. But the dragons could sense the imbalance spreading across space. They had watched stars rise and civilizations fall. They had seen greed and cruelty grow in distant worlds. They knew it was time for Kale to leave the mountains. Valeth called Kale to a hidden cave. The elder dragon spread his wings slowly and lowered his massive head to Kale's level. "It is time," Valeth said with a deep rumble that shook the walls of the cave. "The galaxy needs you." Kale's eyes widened. "Me? Why me? I'm only human. I cannot fight like you." Valeth's golden eyes glowed. "You are clever, brave and kind. You see what others cannot. You can inspire, plan and protect. That is more than many can do. The galaxy will test you, but you carry what is needed." Kale thought about his life on the dragon planet. He remembered how he had learned to observe, to listen, to think before acting. He remembered patience, courage and kindness. He realized the dragons had been preparing him, not for danger on the mountains, but for challenges far larger than he could imagine. When Kale left the mountains, the dragons accompanied him for a short distance, flying alongside him in silent support. The stars seemed close and the planets looked like tiny jewels. Kale felt small but he felt ready. He was not alone. As he traveled, Kale saw worlds in trouble. He visited planets where machines controlled everything and creatures lived without freedom. He visited moons where hunger and fear were common, and where people had almost lost hope. Kale saw that no one could solve these problems alone. The Empire was too strong, the galaxies too large. But Kale did not give up. He remembered what the dragons had taught him. He used clever ideas to help small communities first. He built shelters with simple tools. He taught people how to grow food and share resources. He helped organize leaders of different planets to work together. He did not fight with weapons. He fought with intelligence, patience, and heart. At first, many beings doubted him. They had never seen a human like Kale, clever and brave but not strong like the Empire's soldiers. They laughed or ignored him. But Kale kept going. Slowly, word spread of a human helping worlds not with force, but with thought and kindness. The small victories inspired hope. Communities began to unite, trusting each other and Kale. The Empire noticed. They sent ships, spies, and clever leaders to stop him. But Kale had learned from the dragons to watch, plan, and act with care. He anticipated their moves and used clever strategies. He avoided battles when possible and solved problems before they became dangerous. Kale also used the lessons of courage and kindness. He encouraged creatures of all shapes and sizes to help one another. Even small beings, ignored and weak in the eyes of the Empire, became important. Kale taught them that even the smallest spark could grow into a light that changed the galaxy. One night, on a planet with 2 moons and glowing rivers, Kale stood on a cliff with leaders of several worlds. They had built schools, gardens, and peaceful councils. Kale looked at them and smiled. "We can be strong together," he said. "We do not need to fight. We need to think, help, and believe." The Empire tried to stop them, but Kale had taught the worlds to work as one. Ships and leaders that once ruled alone could not face united communities. Slowly, the Empire's control weakened and planets began to live freely. The galaxy was still large and dangerous, but hope had returned. Kale missed the dragons, especially Valeth. He remembered the warmth of their wings and the wisdom in their eyes. He understood now that the dragons had prepared him for this moment. They had taught him that strength was not only in power, but in courage, patience, intelligence, and kindness. As Kale traveled from world to world, helping where he could, he realized something important. The galaxy did not need a hero with weapons. It needed a human who could think, inspire, and care. That was Kale's gift, the spark that had begun on a lonely dragon planet. And though he was far from home, Kale felt the dragons with him. He felt their lessons, their trust, and their love guiding him. He knew the galaxy's future was not set by the strongest, but by those who used their minds and hearts wisely. The abandoned human child had grown into a clever, brave young man. He was no longer small or weak. He was ready to face the galaxy's challenges and bring hope to countless worlds. The Empire might have been powerful, but Kale had something stronger: wisdom, courage, and the spark of life that the dragons had protected long ago. The galaxy had its crisis, but it had also found its unexpected savior. And Kale, the human once abandoned and raised by dragons, would show that even the smallest spark could light the darkest skies. Kale moved among the stars with careful steps and a clear mind. The worlds he visited were very different from his dragon home. Cities reached high into the sky, ships moved faster than the fastest winds, and creatures of all shapes and colors walked the streets. At first, Kale felt small and unsure. Humans were not considered strong or special in most of these places. Many looked at him with doubt or curiosity. The first city Kale visited was enormous. Tall towers reached toward the clouds, and lights flashed in every color. The creatures who lived there ignored him at first. They were used to leaders with powerful weapons, clever machines, or long histories of conquest. A human boy from a distant planet, even one raised by dragons, seemed weak and unimportant. But Kale did not give up. He remembered the lessons from Valith and the other dragons. He observed carefully, listening to problems and understanding them before acting. He did not demand respect and he did not try to fight. Instead, he asked questions, offered solutions, and helped those in need. One problem Kale noticed was simple but important. The city's water supply was failing because the rivers upstream were blocked. Machines had tried to fix it but failed. Kale walked along the river, studied the problem, and thought carefully. Then he suggested a plan that worked. The water flowed again and the city's people cheered. They began to notice him, not for strength but for cleverness. Kale traveled to other worlds, facing challenges that were different each time. On one planet, storms destroyed farms and the people were starving. Kale helped organize shelters and shared knowledge about growing food in the harsh weather. On another moon, creatures of many species argued and fought over resources. Kale helped them form councils and solve problems through discussion instead of anger. Everywhere he went, Kale used patience, intelligence, and kindness, just as the dragons had taught him. The Empire tried to stop him, sending spies and officers to disrupt his work. But Kale was careful. He watched, learned, and planned before acting. Instead of fighting, he found clever solutions that avoided conflict. Slowly, creatures of many worlds began to trust him. They saw that even a human, small and weak in appearance, could make a big difference. Kale learned the importance of teamwork. He encouraged people from different planets to help one another. Those who were shy, small, or weak learned to contribute in their own ways. Kale showed that everyone could help, and together, even the smallest beings could make a huge impact. During this time, Kale discovered something more about himself. He had courage that came not from fighting, but from believing in others and in what was right. He had wisdom that came from thinking carefully and learning from every mistake. And he had kindness that inspired trust and hope. One night, on a quiet world with 2 moons, Kale sat with leaders from several planets. They had gathered because of his work. Villages were rebuilt, farms were growing again, and councils worked peacefully. Kale looked at them and spoke quietly, "We are stronger when we work together. We do not need weapons or fear. We need understanding, care, and courage." The leaders listened. They had never seen a human like Kale before, but they began to trust him. Slowly the news spread. More worlds joined together, inspired by the human who could not fight like the Empire but could think, help, and unite. Even the Empire began to lose control. Their power was great, but Kale's influence was different. It was quiet, smart, and patient. Planets once ruled by fear began to work together peacefully. Communities that had given up hope began to thrive. The Empire had not expected a human to change the galaxy without a single battle. Kale missed the dragons. He thought of Valith and the others often. He remembered the lessons of patience, courage, and cleverness. He realized that the dragons had prepared him not just to survive, but to inspire others and make the galaxy better. At times, Kale felt lonely. The galaxy was vast, and he was just one human among countless worlds. But he remembered the dragons' words. He carried their wisdom with him. Even when he could not see them, their guidance was with him. He knew he was never truly alone. Kale continued to travel, learning from each world and helping where he could. He learned the languages of many species, understood their ways, and taught them his ideas about courage, wisdom, and kindness. Slowly, creatures who had never trusted humans began to see their value. Through his work, Kale became more than a visitor. He became a symbol of hope. The abandoned human child, once left alone on a dragon planet, was now a clever, brave, and kind leader in the eyes of the galaxy. He showed that strength did not always come from weapons, power, or size. It came from courage, thought, and the desire to help others. As Kale looked at the stars from a cliff on a peaceful world, he smiled. He had come far from the mountains of his dragon home. He had faced doubt, fear, and challenge, but he had grown stronger in heart and mind. The galaxy was vast, dangerous, and full of wonder, but Kale was ready. He was not alone. He carried the wisdom of dragons, the courage of his own spirit, and the spark that could inspire countless worlds. The human among the stars was no longer just a child. He was a guide, a helper, and a spark of hope. The galaxy's future was brighter because of him, and Kale knew that his journey was only beginning. Kale had traveled far and seen many worlds. He had helped planets recover, guided leaders, and inspired countless beings. The galaxy was beginning to change. The Empire's power was weakening not because of battle but because hope had returned. People were no longer afraid. They had learned to work together, to trust one another, and to believe that even one small spark could make a difference. Kale stood on a high cliff on a peaceful world, watching the twin suns set. The sky was painted with gold and purple, and stars began to appear. He thought of the dragons who had raised him, especially Valeth. They had protected him, taught him patience, courage, and wisdom. Without them he would not have been ready for the galaxy. Their lessons had given him the strength to inspire others, even without fire or wings. The creatures of many worlds had begun to call him a savior, though Kale did not think of himself that way. He had never sought glory. He had only wanted to help, to do what was right, and to bring hope to those who had lost it. Yet everywhere he went, beings told stories of the human who could solve impossible problems, unite warring planets, and inspire hope where there had been only fear. Kale traveled to the heart of the galaxy, where the Empire had once ruled all. Massive ships and powerful machines had controlled the planets, but now they were powerless. Communities worked together, and the Empire's leaders had no choice but to leave. Kale did not fight them. He showed them that the galaxy could be free without destruction. The creatures of the worlds, united and strong, guided the Empire to leave peacefully. Everywhere Kale went he saw signs of change. Forests and rivers that had been damaged were healing. Cities that had been ruled by fear now had councils and schools. People learned from one another and shared resources fairly. Kale had shown them that courage, cleverness, and kindness were more powerful than weapons and fear. Even the smallest beings played a part. Kale remembered how the dragons had taught him to value every creature, no matter how small or weak. He encouraged every planet to use the gifts of its people. Artists, farmers, teachers, and engineers all contributed. Together they formed a galaxy that was stronger, smarter, and kinder. Kale's journey had not been easy. He had faced doubt, fear, and misunderstanding at every step. Many had laughed at a human trying to change the galaxy. But Kale had never given up. He had remembered the dragon's lessons. Patience, courage, and cleverness could overcome almost any challenge. He had believed in others and they had believed in him. One day Kale returned to a planet he had helped early in his journey. Villages were thriving and children played in the streets without fear. Leaders greeted him warmly, and the people celebrated not only their freedom but the lessons they had learned. Kale smiled quietly. He did not need applause or honor. Seeing the galaxy alive and hopeful was enough. Kale knew that he could not stay on every world. There were still places to visit, creatures to help, and lessons to teach. But he also understood that the galaxy had learned an important truth. Strength was not only in size, power, or weapons. It was in courage, wisdom, and kindness. A single person, even a human, could make a difference if they believed in what was right. At night, Kale would sit under the stars and think of his dragon home. He imagined Valeth and the others watching from afar, proud but unseen. Kale smiled, feeling their presence in his heart. The dragons had given him life, protection, and knowledge, and now he had used it to touch the galaxy. Kale realized that being a savior was not about fame or power. It was about helping others grow, teaching them to trust, and inspiring hope where it had been lost. He had become the galaxy's savior not by fighting, but by showing that even the smallest spark could light the darkest skies. Stories of Kale spread across worlds. Parents told their children of the human who had been raised by dragons, who solved impossible problems, and who united planets with courage and wisdom. Artists painted his image, writers wrote songs about his deeds, and creatures of all kinds remembered his lessons. Kale had become a symbol not of war but of hope. Even though the galaxy was now safer and more united, Kale continued his journey. There were still places that needed help, still lessons to teach, and still sparks of hope to ignite. But he was no longer just a human child who had been abandoned. He was a guide, a teacher, and a reminder that courage, kindness, and cleverness could change the universe. As Kale looked at the stars from the cliff, he thought about the dragons and the mountains where he had grown. He had learned to trust, to act with thought, and to care for others. The spark that had started in a small cave among dragons had grown into something that touched the entire galaxy. Kale smiled as the twin suns disappeared behind distant mountains. He knew the galaxy would face challenges in the future, but he also knew that the creatures of the worlds now had courage, wisdom, and hope. The abandoned human child had become the galaxy's savior, not through force but through heart, mind, and spirit. And somewhere far away, Valeth and the dragons watched the stars, proud that the spark they had protected had become a light for the entire universe. The galaxy was alive, free, and full of hope. And Kale, the human once abandoned and raised by dragons, had shown that even the smallest spark could shine brighter than the mightiest stars.